My journey probably started way before I even knew there was a problem. I believe I had been deficient in B12 for at least 6 years before it was finally diagnosed. And even then, I didn't get a definitive "yes, you are." Why? Due to the sheer lack of training and education within our health system surrounding B12 deficiency and, in particular, pernicious anemia. I started to feel very unwell over a period of maybe 6 years. I started having excruciating migraines. My stomach was rotting, and I felt so tired it was more than just lack of sleep or energy. I was literally falling asleep and unable to function normally. I visited my GP on several occasions, who conducted so many blood tests and eventually referred me to a specialist in Leeds. Their opinion was I had IBS and sent me away with, wait for it, diarrhea tablets, even though I told him I actually struggled to go. Not the opposite. I knew I didn't have typical symptoms of IBS, so I didn't give up. I must have seen every GP in the surgery, and not one tested my B12. Why? Because it isn't part of the full blood count. You have to request it separately. I then moved to Cumbria, and again my health continued to deteriorate to the point where I was losing my speech, couldn't form words, and just wanted to sleep all the time. I was having panic-like symptoms and suffered a week-long migraine, which caused me to lose my speech for nearly 6 weeks. I visited my GP God knows how many times. I was told I was depressed, given countless medications for my migraines, but the worst bit was when I was told I had MS. Mrs. Marston, I'm going to send you for a brain scan, and I want you to prepare yourself that it will come back that you have white matter on the brain. Can you imagine? Anyway, I had the scan and I didn't have multiple sclerosis. Through the GP testing, I found out I had H. pylori, a very common bacteria that lives in the gut and basically destroys the gut wall. I was given very strong antibiotics, which eradicates this bacterium, which did clear up. That was the last I thought about that, and there was no follow-up with the doctors. But it later turned out that either the H. pylori or the nasty antibiotics triggered an autoimmune response, which led to the destruction of my stomach wall. While this was all going on, I did extensive research of my own, narrowing other things down, researching my symptoms. It was through this research that I came across a lot of articles about H. pylori and the links to pernicious anemia. H. pylori can lead to autoimmune atrophic gastritis. Given that I have had other autoimmune issues in the past, alarm bells started to ring. So, I booked yet another appointment with my GP and insisted on seeing a gastroenterologist as I wanted the camera into my stomach. By this time, I was really ill. The panic attacks were daily, the brain fog, the forgetting words, not being able to say what I wanted to say, memory loss, forgetting I had been on days out. And I will be honest, I actually felt like I wasn't even here. I went for my endoscopy, and the specialist advised me that I had atrophic gastritis, basically thinning of the stomach lining. At this point, it was chronic acute gastritis. Now I knew that this diagnosis meant that I had lost my intrinsic factor and would need B12 injections for life, because I had done my research. Your intrinsic factor sits in the lining of your stomach, and you need intrinsic factor to convert B12 in the body to a usable form. Guess what though? Even the gastroenterologist didn't recognize B12 deficiency and didn't initiate B12 injections. I continued to deteriorate, and I had stopped working by now. I could no longer do my job. Being on the telephone interviewing candidates was impossible. I would stutter, break into panic attacks, and basically couldn't even function. The final time I went to the doctors, I broke down and said, "This is wrong, I need help." Right there and then my GP had no hesitation and gave me a B12 injection there and then. He then actioned my loading doses, which were over a period of weeks. Mr. Cooper was right though, the loading doses stopped, and then I was put on a maintenance dose of 1 injection every 3 months. Anyone with this illness will tell you that this is shocking. This is nowhere near enough. In fact, a dog with the same illness gets an injection once a week. You might say it's because it's a money maker for the vets. No, it's actually because animals get treated way better than humans, and I got that information from a vet in Glasgow that I met on a trip away. After this diagnosis, I joined the B12 charities and contacted Martin Hooper, the chairman, and asked for advice. He advised me on the correct protocol for treating B12 deficiency and warned me that the GP do not follow guidelines. Guidelines state that loading doses should continue until all symptoms have stopped. I also came across a man called Dr. Chandy on the internet, a GP from County Durham, who incidentally had been struck off the GMC for treating people with B12 injections and had successfully cured people diagnosed with MS. I was so intrigued by this man, and he clearly had a lot of knowledge surrounding pernicious anemia, I went to meet him. What an amazing experience. He showed me case study after case study of people he had treated and regained their mobility due to wrong diagnosis, when in fact a simple B12 injection could have cured them. So my journey then began in extensively researching my illness. I read research papers, I joined support groups on Facebook, I contacted the charities, I stayed in regular contact with Dr. Chandy, and this research turned my life around. Dr. Chandy advised me that ideally, I should have daily injections until my symptoms improved. There was no way the GP were going to allow this, as they have to stick to the guidelines. These support groups taught me that if I was going to get better, I had to take my life into my own hands. I read absolutely everything I could about pernicious anemia, and I absolutely became obsessed with it. My research brought me to the point I realized to get better I must self-medicate. My family were against it. I had to really educate my husband. So just like many others with my illness, I bought my B12 and started self-treating. The first time I injected myself, using insulin needles. I won't lie, I nearly passed out. But then I just got used to it. It took about 6 months of daily injections for me to improve, and I gradually reduced the injections to every other day. I could not drink alcohol as it sent me back into panic mode, and I learned that alcohol depletes your B12. 3 years later, I am now on once-a-week injection and 90% improved. When I didn't start treating myself, my stomach, which had been distended due to lack of movement, completely calmed down and went back to normal. My memory returned, my speech improved, and the numbness I had in my legs stopped progressing. But most of all, it was like I had woken up. For years, I had felt in a daydream.